is that the time already? It must be time for Raconteurs News. I must get my computer on.
Raconteurs News.
This is Max Egan, and you are listening to Raconteurs News on peoplesinternetRadio.com.
And good evening, and welcome to Raconteurs News this evening. It's Tuesday evening. It's somewhere in February, I think. We're around about the 16th, and you're joined by me, Jason Holmes, and as usual, we've got Andy Young with us. How you doing, Andy?
I'm good, Jason. How are you, mate?
Well, I say we've got Andy Young with us. We've got the Governor-General, Andy Young, overseeing everything that's going on. Yeah, we've got a fantastic guest tonight. We've got former hospital porter, radio presenter, show presenter, producer, and, of course, mastermind UFO runner-up, Ben Emlyn-Jones. How you doing, Ben?
Hello, Jason. How are you? I remember that I remember that mastermind competition very well. Yes, we were all on the edge of our black seats.
Oh, I've got a hazy recollection myself there.
Oh, yeah, I'm talking to the winner, aren't I? Now, yeah.
Oh, it was embarrassing, Ben. You were robbed, like I said.
Did you reckon?
I got the easiest question in the whole tournament as my tiebreaker at the end, and unfortunately, you got one that I'd never heard of.
Oh, that's how it goes. Not to worry, mate. Not to worry. It wasn't exactly the Olympics, you know.
No, it was a good bit of fun, though.
Yeah. Oh, it was great. Yeah, very exciting.
So, what have you been up to lately, then, Ben?
Oh, well, I've been trying to write a book on UFOs. UFOs is just one of the many subjects that I cover. But I've been trying to write a book all about it, which is it's a story about disclosure. It's about the UFO disclosure business. It's fictional. It's an imaginary fictional story. And that's taken up most of my time, actually. Certainly now I'm picking up the pace because I've been working on it since around about summer last year, but it's getting to the point where I need to focus on it really considerably because I'm close to finishing it. And it's getting hard. It's getting more difficult. So it's not easy writing a book like that. So I'm doing that most of the time. I'm writing whenever I can and doing the radio shows and, well, I haven't done much Panamo TV lately because of the book. But that's how it goes. There's only one of me. Someone's got to write the book.
Well, that's it. I was going to ask you, actually, if you were twins, Ben.
I need to clone myself, actually. I don't know if the scientists at Peasmore can do a job on me, you know. I really do need something like that right now. Someone who can take care of one thing and another me take care of that bit. Things like that.
Yeah.
My wife takes care of most of my things, otherwise I'd probably cease to exist.
Oh, no. What would you do without her? Eh?
That's
exactly. So you're writing, it's a novel you're writing. It's a piece of fiction, yeah? That's
right, yeah. There was I was listening to a radio show with Stephen Bassett, my old mate, who is in this disclosure business, and he said that it would be nice to write an alternative history story about what would have happened if there hadn't been this truth embargo, as he calls it. In other words, the cover-up of the UFO subject. He says, I'm not going to write that, but hopefully someone will. And I thought, well, why don't I? I'm a writer of fiction. I've written 2 novels before. I've written numerous short stories. I can do it. And I said that sort of very lightly, thinking, without realising how difficult this task would be. But so I wrote to Steve, and I said, well, look, Steve, I'll do it if you like. I mean, I can do that. And he was very encouraging. He wrote back and said, yeah, go for it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm now doing that, hoping to get it finished within the next couple of months. I can't set an exact date on that, but I'll be glad when it's done. I really will, because it's really difficult. I'll have really achieved something when it's done.
And one of the things I think probably worth mentioning is you took your lovely lady Sue away for the weekend, and you went up to Hull to see Richard D. Hall. How did that go?
Yeah, well, not well at first, because I told her we were going to Mallorca. I sort of broke the news on the bus to the airport that, actually, we're not going to Mallorca to sit under a palm tree and sip rum and champagne, I'm afraid. We're going to Hull to see Richard D. Hall live. Oh, yes, I know how to give a girl a good time. I really do. It was a bit sticky situation. But when we got there, we both enjoyed it. Richard is doing a tour at the moment. He's on a nationwide tour all through this month. And he did his show in Hull on Sunday. Tonight he's in Liverpool. And then I think tomorrow he's Derby, then Birmingham, London, Aylesbury, Weston-super-Mare, Tudfield in South Wales. So, yes, it's really worth going to see. If you're near one of those areas, which you will be, I'm sure wherever you are in the country, you'll be near somewhere around there. It's worth getting along to see one of these shows. And he talks about an awful lot of things. He moves away from into very, very different subjects. So he covers a wide variety of subjects. He's been studying Madeline NcCann. Now, anyone who knows anything now, sees anything, heard of Madeline NcCann, this young girl who supposedly went missing from Holiday Apartment, a young little 3-year-old in 2007. Well, there's a lot of mysteries associated with this about why that's been made such a cause célèbre when, sadly, little kids like that go missing all the time. It's a very, very common thing. It's so common it doesn't even make the news. But unfortunately, children do go missing regularly. And unfortunately, it looks as if the parents are lying about it, and the other witnesses, their friends who are with them, are lying about what happened. Their stories are full of holes, and there's also been some forensic examination of the apartment with dogs, which are trained to sniff for dead bodies. And unfortunately, they detect that a dead body was kept in that apartment, which means it's unlikely Madeline is still alive.
Yeah, well, Ben, I can't help noticing. I think it was when I went to the garage the other day, I saw the kind of headlines on the newsstand, and I think it was the Sun had got the headlines saying that Kate McCann is saying that Madeline is still alive and in Portugal. I mean,
I wonder what Richard will make of that, because it was just the day after he was right in the middle of his tour. And I think every so often you get a headline about Madeline, about her being alive somewhere. They change the story all the time. First she's alive and she's been taken to Morocco, then she's alive and she's in Ireland, and then she's in America, and then she turns up everywhere. But Richard no doubt will suspect that this was put in the newspapers deliberately because it happened to be during the middle of his tour. And he may well be right. It may well be because Richard's saying all this stuff about Madeline and he's done this investigation. He's just released another DVD of it, which I've got a copy. I picked a copy off his stall. That it looks like very likely that Madeline, they want to keep, for some reason, I don't know why it is, that the McCann's story is being treated like this. Firstly, it's been covered up. Yeah. The killing of this young girl, with the parents in some way they know something about it and they're not saying, which is really, really strange thing for parents to do when a child is killed. Mm-hmm. And then there's the fact that it's become so widespread in the media. She's written a book, Kate McCann. They're appearing on TV all over the place.
There was something came up the other day, well, a few weeks ago, Ben. Somebody contacted me, somebody I know quite well, and was telling me about a long-haul flight they were on some time ago, and somebody fell ill, and the call was put out, is there a doctor on board? And apparently Jerry McCann stood up and said, I'm a nurse.
Oh.
Now,
because they're both supposed to be doctors.
I don't know of any nurses who would doctors who would profess to be nurses. And then, it was all very strange, and apparently they were sat next to each other, the McCanns, when this person figured out who they were, but they never spoke all the way on the journey.
That is very, very odd, because they're both supposed to be doctors. I mean, this is what we've been told, and they're GPs.
Yeah.
I just don't get that at all. Andy, that's really
that
really
is very strange.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of questions to be answered by the McCanns and also by the authorities. What really happened to that little girl? Where is she? She's probably not alive. So where do they put her? Where's her body?
At the risk of sort of asking you more about Richard D. Hall, this show about you, but I just wondered that Madeline McCann documentary in its entirety is huge and vastly comprehensive, and it covers a whole range of things that you just don't get inside a sort of 1 hour made-for-TV documentary. I just wondered how long did it take you? How long did he spend in Praia da Luz researching and getting that filming?
I know he went at least once to Praia da Luz. He went all the way around there. I mean, I don't know exactly how long he spent on it, but I know that Richard, he works incredibly hard on these things. He does this all completely single-handed. And as you say, the videos, these are really, really long videos. He's on his third one now. They're just 3 to 4 hours long. There's 3 parts to it so far. There's the Phantoms. There's part 1, then there's part 2, the Phantoms, and there's part 3, When Madeline Died, I think it's called. And it's a 4-disc DVD. Every disc is an hour long, and doesn't drag. I mean, it's packed with information. And basically, Richard is doing the job that the police should be doing. The policeman, Colonel Amaral, the head of police in Praia da Luz, he actually did try to look into this and was blocked by his superiors. So Richard is now, as a private citizen, not a police officer, he's going in there and doing the job that Colonel Amaral, I think, would like to do. There's other people who've spoken. Do you know there's a guy called Shaw Taylor, he's dead now, sadly, but he was a policeman, and he used to present a TV show on crime. It was called Police 5.
Yeah.
A bit like Crime Watch, and it was very, very similar to Crime Watch. I mean, he has spoken out and said, look, if this is a police investigation, come on, you need to charge those, you need to get those McCanns, arrest them, question them, do some more forensic examination, because this is just stinks to high heaven of a cover-up. But the weird thing about the McCanns was, I mean, like I said, children go missing all the time, sadly. I read an article once called 80 Maddies a Month by Brian Gerrish, I believe. It wasn't questioning the Madeline McCann story, but as its title was suggesting, it's up to 80 children a month in this country go missing in the way Madeline did. But what's weird is none of those, what happened with Madeline, it's the moment she was reported missing, an official from Interpol and from the British Embassy headed straight in Lisbon, headed straight for Praia da Luz. Someone from the Foreign Office came over from London. Gordon Brown was woken up apparently in the early hours. It's almost like it's almost like a wartime situation. The forces of government were mobilised the moment this little girl went missing.
That's the incredible part for me. It seems that the wheels of everything went into motion, and even people that were you had Clarence Mitchell, who was the royal correspondent, and I don't understand how he becomes involved. It just seems that this entire operation began once the news broke, because I don't think that the news broke at the time when Madeline went missing. I think that Madeline had been missing long before the news broke. I think
Richard
the news
said
broke
that,
because I remember it breaking. I remember being in my car. I was on my way home from Bury in Lancashire because I've been working as a DJ, and so it was about 2 a.m. when this story broke. So it broke in the middle of the night, where people can't really be asking questions and there's nobody listening. So any discrepancies that are in reporting can easily be discounted. Not many people are going to hear them. So that's what it smacks to me of. There's something incredibly large, something more than just 2GP's daughter from Leicester. And
I find it very, very strange. Very, very strange indeed that looking into the backgrounds of the McCanns, I mean, they're not royalty, they're not film stars, they're an ordinary couple from a suburban place in Leicester. Kate originally comes from Liverpool. She's got a Scouse accent. They come across. I mean, unless we're missing something, we obviously are missing something here, because they appear to be completely ordinary people. Yet they've been turned into these celebrities over their supposedly missing daughter, who is probably not really missing, and no one will admit it. or no one will look into it, apart from people like Richard, who are independent.
Well, that's the strange thing for me, Ben. There's children go missing every day of every week.
Sadly, yes.
And unfortunately, you only ever see one poster child every so often in the mainstream media. And they go completely overboard on the story. Yeah, it's obviously a tragedy when any child goes missing or is murdered. But it happens all the time, but we seem to have the focus on one child and one child only. And it's usually a really pretty child, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, she's a sweet looking little girl. I mean, although my little girl was sweet when she was that age, you know, she still is. She's 21 now, but she's not always sweet, but she's a lot of the time. But the thing about it is, I mean, going back to Clarence Mitchell. Clarence Mitchell was the guy who liaised with Rupert Murdoch to make sure. And one of the things they said was, we'll make sure Madeline's story is a front page story at regular intervals. So a certain period will go by, then we'll put it on the front page of every national tabloid. Which is, and you see, as you've just said, yesterday it was on the front cover of the Sun again. Whether that's anything to do with Richard's tour or not, I don't know. But it's another sign they pulled something else out of their arse about. She's in Portugal. Who knows? Says Kate McCann says she's in Portugal. How do you know? Oh, we just sort of like thought, and you know, it's all a nonsense. As Richard said, it's insulting to our intelligence. Yet it keeps Madeline in the public profile, and it keeps the false story of what happened to her in the front of people's minds. As I said, I don't know why, but that's what they're doing.
Yeah, well, Jeff's just pointed out in the chat room that those DVDs run to a total of 11 hours, which is pretty comprehensive. He also did comment that Richard's language at the Newcastle show was worse than a docker. So I presume he meant Richard. I don't know if it was anyone else who was there.
Well, he is a Geordie, isn't he? You know, when Geordies get angry, you know, they turn the air blue.
Yeah, and then he also just added GM, presumably that's Jerry McCann, is well connected, allegedly.
Right. Well, that might explain something. I mean, it might as I said, they portrayed the McCanns as pretty ordinary people, and they come across as ordinary people. But if there are connections there, you know, maybe with their background in terms of their connection to networks and things like that, various types, then it may do something to explain why they've had all this attention.
So, yeah, when you say that they're ordinary people, Ben, some of the things they do are not what I'd call ordinary. You know, your daughter goes missing and you set up a fund to fight. And all that fund appears to be using for is closing down people who put forward contrary opinions to what's given in the mainstream media.
Yeah. Well, I've got a bit of a theory about this, particularly with sort of Madeline McCann and these high-profile stories such as the Soham girls and things like that. I think that there's a culture in the media to create celebrity victims. Now, if you remember. If you look back, look, Madeline McCann's parents have written books and they've made millions out of this. There's no denying that they've made fortunes out of this. They might all be able to hide behind, it's the Find Madeline campaign and all that. But fundamentally, they've made millions out of this. And they were even, I think at one point, they were even criticised because they took a mortgage payment out of the Find Madeline fund. But again, with the Huntley girls, you had before they were even found. You had these girls, the parents of these girls had been invited to Manchester United to attend a game. So these are before their girls' bodies had been found, I believe. I'm pretty sure, if not, it was just afterwards. And they're being filmed at Manchester United grounds. So what I'm trying to get, my point is, if we have victim celebrities, we can then have celebrity victims.
Yeah, now this is an important point. Now, as far as the Soham murders go, there's a whole backstory to this, which is a reason why this might have happened. And Dave Starbuck, he's been a bit quiet the last few years, but he's a researcher who went into this at the time. Now, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, both 10 years old, were found dead. And immediately, two suspects were arrested, Maxine Kerr and Ian Huntley. And before you know, and once those guys were arrested, they were essentially tried, prosecuted, and convicted and executed in in the media, weren't they? I mean, the media sensationalism over these two suspects was incredible. There's no way they could ever have got a fair trial, and indeed they weren't going to get one. Now, the thing is, I believe that Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr was sort of acquitted of most of the charges. Ian Huntley, of course, was convicted of murder. I believe he's a patsy. I believe that he didn't do it. The reason I believe he was selected was, firstly, he's not very bright. He has quite a low IQ. Secondly, he has a history of offences related to children, comparatively minor offences related to children, which means he makes the perfect patsy. Now, what happened is the actual story is full of holes. You get these girls were found apparently buried, although there was no, the amount of soil on the bodies didn't match them being buried. Secondly, we hear that Ian Huntley burnt the Manchester United tops they were wearing, because, as you just said, Jason, the parents were invited to Man United to a match there. The girls, of course, these photos, one of the last photos taken of them alive, show them wearing these Manchester United jerseys. And now apparently Huntley tried to burn those jerseys. They found the jerseys partly burnt. Now, the idea of a partly burned jersey these girls were wearing is a very powerful emotional statement. It's got the act of burning, the act of desecration of the jerseys these girls were wearing. After he just killed these girls, he then tried to burn their jerseys. And it's so emotional that many, many people who hear that story will not pause to think logically about it. How can you try to burn two nylon jerseys, football jerseys? Burning this material is some of the easiest stuff in the world to burn, which means either if you're going to burn it, you could either do it properly, there's nothing left but ash, or you don't burn it. But what we have is the act of burning plus recognisable objects which weren't quite burned. So you have these Manchester United jerseys with the act of burning. When you're actually in a real situation, that could never come out. It would be very unlikely to come about. Now, what happened was, Solom is in Cambridgeshire, not far from what used to be a major American base. Mm-hmm. Now, an individual in the US Air Force was stationed at that base who is now in jail. He's now doing life in jail for the murder of an 8-year-old Japanese girl on the island of Okinawa, because he was then moved. He was stationed in Okinawa after that, and this girl was murdered. He was caught this time, and he was convicted. Now, what I suspect has happened, as I've talked to Dave about this, what I suspect has happened is this is the individual who might well have killed Holly and Jessica. But it happened at a time in August 2002 when, things were building up to the Iraq invasion. There were American forces stationed in this country in preparation for that. And for a US serviceman, a man in the US military, to have killed children in Britain would have thrown this whole action of having US bases in Britain into scandal. Yeah. So what Dave believes, and I think he's right, I think the evidence points that way, is that the government decided to cover it up by letting this guy get away with it, this American serviceman get away with it, and framing Ian Huntley for
framing the village idiot.
Yeah, framing the village idiot. Thing is, if the fact of the matter is, if they'd arrested and convicted that and investigated properly, then the little girl in Okinawa would be alive today, because the man would be in jail. He wouldn't have been able to go to Okinawa and then kill another girl. Yeah,
I think we should point out it's RAF Lakenheath, isn't it? That's close to Tom. Yeah.
That's where the girls were found, close to the perimeter of RAF Lakenheath base.
Yeah. Which is unusual. You wouldn't think that somebody would dispose of bodies next to a perimeter of a military base somewhere that's going to be monitored.
Yeah, I know. It's unless, of course, he was in the vicinity. In other words, he was stationed at base and working on the base. Mm. You see, so this can't be proven, but because of course no one will look into this. The authorities.
Well, I was actually speaking when I was saying someone's going to be. I was talking about Huntley. He wouldn't be. I mean, really. I mean, do you think he would go to take the girls from where he was in his relatively safe in the house? He's safe from being discovered because Maxine's away anyway. So, is he going to take them then to a place where he knows he's going to be monitored?
Yeah, it's. And I mean, this is another strange thing is that straight after Richard D. Hall broadcast a program all about this case. In fact, I was actually the guest in that program. I remember. He then what's on the front page of the newspaper? A story about Ian Huntley, because apparently he wants to get married. He wants to get married to this woman who's been writing to him. Some woman who apparently has a fetish for serial killers has fallen in love with him, and now they're going to get married. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it just seems, Richard said, it's an odd coincidence. This comes out the very day after I broadcast that TV show about the Soham murders.
We've got a comment in the chat room there from Jeff again, and he says the late Dean Warwick did an interesting interview with Dave Starbuck about the Soham incident. I'd got Dave Starbuck in my head, but I couldn't think who you meant. But he's the guy who did the talk at Probe about numerology last year, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's a very interesting chap. He's been in this business for a long time. He's an old guy. I didn't hear from him for a while. I didn't even know if he was still alive. And then I bumped into him at Probe a couple of years ago, and he remembered me. But he did an interview with Dean Warwick, who later, incidentally, in 2006, died on stage in Probe. I was in the audience at the time. I remember it very well. He was talking about this. They were talking about this very subject, about these two girls. Now, whether... I don't know what's going to happen here. I mean, what we can do is keep speaking the truth, bringing up these questions, and maybe Ian Huntley will get a retrial. But if he gets a retrial, then the idea will go out, well, who did it? If he didn't do it, who did? And then they're going to have to start, their fingers are going to have to start pointing elsewhere. But we have an individual who obviously is a very violent and dangerous man, capable of this horrific crime, who was in the area at the time, and he was not questioned. And he did go on to commit another offence on another base in another location, and he's now in jail. So, really, if I was a policeman, where would you look first? The local school caretaker, or to go for a guy who's got a previous on this and was in the area at the time?
So, do you think that they actually knew who the perpetrator was, and they had the suspicions on who the perpetrator was, and then they pinned it on Huntley, or do you think that they just put the sights on Huntley and just didn't veer out of that line of sight?
I can't imagine they would cover this up, be able to cover it up, unless they realised what had actually happened. I mean, you can't cover something up when you don't know what actually really happened. The purpose of a cover-up is to actually create a false story to cover up one which is true. They must have had at least an inkling of what the true story was, and realise, oh my God, there's an American guy stationed on this base who is dangerous, and he's killed. That's what we're going to do about it. And they realise the political implications of that. It's and of course, I mean, the media helps out. I mean, the news stories over the Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr it's ridiculously unprofessional. Ridiculously, it was quite horrific. The way there's no way they were ever going to get a fair trial. So, in a sense, we had this image, this horrible crime. It was put there. It was this awful image of this horrible criminal who'd done these things, these poor young girls. And, of course, everyone's just going to scream for blood. No one's going to think... In those situations, it's almost like traumatic mind control. It shuts down the brain's logical thought processes in order to create them, to get you to react in the fight and flight mechanism, using the fight and flight mechanism, purely emotional response, a reflex reaction.
Yeah, emotional response, which is why it was always in the news, and also they had to use, because he had no real previous convictions, they had to use sort of accusations that had been levelled against him, which really is not, it's not really on, is it, in a democratic society, in a fair, just society, someone to get a free trial, a fair trial, that they're what they've been suspected of in the past, or perhaps somebody's made up about them in the past, is brought and it's admissible.
Yeah, well, you'd think that, yeah, I mean, they have to, the patsy has to be demonised, the patsy has to be made out to be some kind of complete rat, a complete rat bag. So a massive backstory was concocted to make him look bad, to make him look like a real, it's the kind of guy who would commit a crime like that. Something similar was done with Martin Bryant, who, similar to Ian Huntley, was a guy who he actually killed about 18 people, I believe, in a place called Port Arthur in Australia. He shot them. Well, he didn't. I believe he didn't. There's a guy called Joe Viles in Australia who's uncovered this. But Martin Bryant was similar to Ian Huntley. He was not a very bright chap. He had an IQ of 66. But he was framed, I think, to cover up somebody else who did that attack. Again, the evidence doesn't. The evidence all points towards him being innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's not difficult to believe either, because if you watch, I've watched that Stephen Avery documentary on Netflix, the 11-hour-long one, The Making of a Murderer, which I would highly recommend. It's 11 hours of your life that you really won't mind giving away. But I've watched that, and it just seems to me that when you get the rank and file police officers, they seem to recruit people who have a propensity to just follow orders and to just have blinkers and just focus in on one suspect rather than trying to find out actually what happened.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, any police officers who are not like that can be controlled in other ways, through vice and through threats, either real or imagined. The case of vice. Do you remember that the policeman leading the investigation into this murder was found to have child pornography on his computer, apparently. Do you remember that? Now, this came out of the blue. Now, maybe he did have child pornography on his computer, or was it planted on his computer? Because I believe Scott Ritter, the weapons inspector in Iraq, I think he may well have had child pornography basically put on there. Because you can do that. You can upload, you can put some malware in, which will upload this stuff without your permission. And of course the intelligence services have the very best of that kind of thing. But was this guy doing something he wasn't supposed to be told he was doing? In other words, did this police officer, was he going to speak out? Was he going to say something which might throw Ian Huntley's conviction into question? In which case he had to be discredited, and discredited fast. Alternatively, the thing about it is, they'll either assassinate your character, or they'll assassinate you. Now, in the case of both the Paris bombing and the Charlie Hebdo attacks, which happened in Paris last year, of course, one in the beginning of the year, one in November, on both occasions, the police officer leading the investigations shot himself.
Incredible, isn't it?
Now, is that a coincidence? You see, it's another example of how they can make sure that the truth gets buried under the cover story.
Yeah, their version of the truth has to come out, and nothing else will do. What about, while we're in that sort of area of the country, I've also read some things regarding Steve Wright, the Suffolk Strangler.
Right, I've not heard of him.
There's a similar sort of thing, because first of all, the guy in the frame for these murders that were the chief suspect, he was an ex-copper.
Right, I've not heard of that one.
You've not heard of that one, all right?
No. But that's was that a kind of I think it was back in 2006. Now there were 5 in December of 2006. There were 5 murders, 5 bodies found, prostitutes in Ipswich. Right.
Over a period of not very long. I think the whole incident only lasted 20 days. But in that time, 5 bodies were found. Now, the bodies were found at different locations and at different times from when they've been dumped. So they've got this sort of mishmash of order of when these bodies had been killed, whereas against when the bodies had been found. Now, initially, there was these were all prostitutes in Ipswich. Now, initially, this guy, this weird guy who'd got this Facebook account and called himself the Bishop, and he'd got like really weird photographs of himself with his eyes closed and then sort of eyes drawn on his eyelids. How weird that is.
Yeah.
And he was an ex-copper, and he sort of brought himself forward as a suspect to the police and said, I know all these girls. I've had dealings with all these girls. I know them. I do. Oh, come and talk. Yada yada yada. Yeah. And then they arrested him. And then suddenly he was released, and this other guy, Steve Wright, who lived in the area in the red light area, he was arrested, and eventually he was convicted of all 5 murders. Now, I don't know whether he was or not guilty of the murders, but I found it very interesting there was a particular article that I read that I found very interesting that suggested that he'd been framed to cover up the copper, or the former copper.
Yeah. Now that's interesting. I mean, I've not heard of that case before. From what you've told me about it, it wouldn't surprise me at all, Jason, because that's the kind of thing they will do. There's several other of these spree killers and serial killers which are suspicious, and their behaviour, again, it doesn't quite fit the facts. And another case Richard's investigated is quite similar to that. It's the case of Derek Bird. This was a mild-mannered man from Cumbria who got up one morning, took a gun and shot dead 12 people, including his twin brother. And then he drove his car up onto a hillside and he shot himself. So getting rid of the perpetrator was dead as well, so no one could question him. And the witness statements describe all kinds of different individuals behind it. Again, we have this situation with Martin Bryant in Australia, where the witnesses' descriptions don't match the suspect. And then, of course, then the official story comes out, it was this guy, Derek Bird. He just went crazy and shot some people. Interestingly, the BBC News, they didn't just do a location report, they actually presented the 6 o'clock news that very day from Whitehaven, Cumbria, which means in the space of just 8 hours, they got up, put everything in a van and transferred their entire studio. Not just a reporter on the scene, but their entire studio, reporter, everything, up to Whitehaven. Now that's very, very unlikely unless they knew in advance they were going to need to do that.
Well, just in their defence, I mean, are you talking about a BBC coverage?
Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, there are BBC local radios and TV stations that would be able to get the equipment there, and perhaps the only thing you really need to do is fly up somebody to front the news. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, all right.
I can see how how they could do that.
Maybe that's the case. It's still, I mean, there's a lot of other evidence though related to that case.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a fact that, buried under this pile of shock and horror was one man in particular who was a solicitor called Kevin Cummins. Kevin Commons, his name was. Now, he was a solicitor that was suing a company called United Utilities for millions of pounds because they had very incompetently let their reservoir overflow in the autumn, when the experts were telling them, look, in Cumbria you need to reduce the level of the reservoir because in winter there's a lot of rain and snow melt and things like that. It comes off the hills, off those fells, and it fills up reservoirs, and they overflow and you'll get a flood. And United Utilities didn't do that. And as a result, there was a flood in Cumbria in 2009. Well, there's just been another one, hasn't there? But there was an even worse one in 2009, in which millions of pounds worth of damage was done, hundreds of homes were destroyed, and a policeman died. A policeman drowned trying to keep people off a bridge, because there was a bridge he was standing on the bridge to stop cars going on it because it was so dangerous. And in the course of this duty, the bridge was eventually swept away with him on it. So this was a major issue. And Richard also thinks that this could have been tied into the climate change issue, because it seems very, very important through official channels that we believe that when these floods happen, it is the fault of one thing and one thing alone: climate change. It's got nothing to do with human incompetence or the mismanagement of the waterways or anything like that. It's climate change. And one of the things that Kevin Commons could have done if his lawsuit had gone ahead, because the thing is, when Commons died, no one else at the firm would take it over. So basically, United Utilities got off the hook. But Richard thinks the bigger strategy might be at a higher level. You know, obviously the company collaborated, but at a higher level, they want us to believe that these things are caused purely by climate change and nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that thinks that these things are set up and there's one directive and one directive only, then that's ridiculous. I mean, obviously the Derek Bird situation killed at least 2 birds with 1 stone. Yeah. So, it stopped the lawsuit against United Utilities, did you say?
Yes.
Yep. It stopped that lawsuit, and apparently the guy that took over the lawsuit after that Commons guy had been murdered, the guy that took over it, he died as well, didn't he?
Did he?
Yeah, I think he did, yeah.
Well, I mean, that may explain why none of the briefs at the firm wanted to take the case on.
Well, the case collapsed after that.
Yeah, so. I'm not surprised. Yeah, oh my God. I mean, that's... yeah, I mean, see, these things are put down to coincidence. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to disprove a coincidence. I can't, if two meteors land on the same spot, it's very difficult to prove that's not a coincidence, and so that's why. But the fact of the matter is that there is this direct evidence as well in terms of the witness descriptions. Anyone who looked into this, as Richard has done. Again, Richard has done the job that the police should be doing. He's gone to Cumbria, just like he went to Portugal, and he's investigated on the scene, talked directly to witnesses, and he said, look, what did this guy look like? And they said, well, he was about 20 years old with spiky brown hair. When Derek Budd was 52 and he was balding.
Yeah.
Things like that. And there's a fact that two different vehicles were used. I mean, this is provable because based on the police's own CCTV evidence shows that the two vehicles were different. They were taxis, apparently. Derek Budd was a taxi driver, and he drove. But one of the pictures, it's a completely different vehicle. It's not a taxi. It's the same name, got no taxi sign on it. So, really, again, with 12 people killed. It doesn't matter to the people who perpetrated this act. They wanted to just make sure there was a mountain of shock and horror under which they could bury their true motive. So that's another good example.
Yes, and that also ties in quite well to another case that I remember Richard investigating quite well. That was the Rail Moat shootings. Because there's a lot of anomalies there, isn't there? Particularly centred around that policeman David Rathband and his connections with Lisa French and.
Well, this is very odd because, David Rathband was in the papers the other day. I can't remember what it was about because I don't buy newspapers, but I did briefly flick through a story about him.
His family were trying to sue the Northumberland police, I think, for negligence regarding him, and the case collapsed.
Right, I see. See, poor David Rathband, he committed suicide. The thing about it is, he was shot by Raoul Moat, apparently. Raoul Moat was this guy who'd just been released from jail, and he went with a gun, didn't he? He got a gun out. I can't remember the details right now off the top of my head, but he got a gun and he shot a few people, and then he apparently shot David Rathband in the face, in which case he blinded him.
Yeah.
However, David Rathband, of course, was in love with Lisa French. He fell in love with this woman called Lisa French, and he had a new lease of life. His doctor also told him that he was going to have an operation to have his sight restored. So things were looking up for him. Mm-hmm. So why did he kill himself then?
It's all very curious. It's a bit like Lisa French. Lisa French was on the bus, I think, that was opened like a sardine can outside the British Medical Association in Tavistock Square. A little clue there.
Tavistock Square, my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, and there was no mention of the fact that she'd seen this bomber get on the bus with a rucksack until the inquest, which it transpired was just after David Rathband was shot in the face, wasn't it?
Yeah, now this is odd because, we're going back to the 7/7 bombing now. Mm-hmm. Which is it's an absolutely classic, just like 9/11, a classic false flag terrorist attack in which there's a cover-up of a true story, which is an engineered fake story. Exactly with 9/11. In 9/11 there was Bin Laden and the 19 hijackers. Mm-hmm. With 7/7 there was these guys, four guys, Muslims who wanted to plant these bombs, and of course the evidence does not fit, again, the official story. Yet various witnesses have come forward. Now, Lisa French played a vital role, I think. There's never been a public inquiry into 7/7. It's important to realise, but she did speak out at the hearing,
the inquest.
The inquest, and which she said things that she said she saw one of the bombers getting on the bus when there's no evidence to suggest that man was even on the bus. There's no evidence to suggest there was an explosion on that bus. We see a bus which has been damaged. It's obviously not in working order. It's been damaged. But it doesn't look like a bus that's been blown up. It looks more like a bus that's maybe gone under a low bridge, to me. But, of course, that makes her very, very important. It makes her very, very important, her testimony to the official story.
Well, it looks like it's gone under a low bridge, Ben, until you zoom in on the photographs and look at the window supports on the bus. They appear to be cut through with an angle grinder.
Yeah, oh right. Well, that's even more strange, isn't it?
You know, it's almost as if it was pre-prepared and it was some kind of theatrical incident.
Yeah. I mean, I watched this. I mean, this is why you can't trust the mainstream media. I mean, there was this documentary by the BBC on 7/7 conspiracy theories. So we're going to look at these conspiracy theories, which means, does the evidence stack up? Well, you know what this program's going to be, don't you? It's going to be a hit piece. And sure enough, it was. But the thing about it is, they said that people like me, who are conspiracy theorists, so-called, what we believe is that the whole thing was perpetrated, the whole cover-up was perpetrated by Transport for London, because there was a surge of power on the line which caused the explosions. And then Transport for London realised they were liable for the deaths of 70-odd people. So they put up this fake story about terrorism, including a bus which they pretended to, they just put a damaged bus in the road and said it had been blown up. The thing is, I've never said that. No one I know has ever suggested that theory.
First time I heard it, Ben.
It was on the bloody programme.
No. Instead of a real programme would have said, right, this is the evidence that the official story is based upon, and this is why they don't think it stacks up. That's what a real programme would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is what I mean. I would never ever go on any of these programs. I mean, I was actually there was a TV show called it was Conspiracy Road Trip. There was 3 of them. There was one about 9/11, which had Charlie Veach, and there was 2 more. There was 3 more actually. One about UFOs, one about 7/7, another one. I was actually asked to take part in the follow-up series, and I declined. I said, not a chance. And when I saw it, when I saw the programs, I was very relieved.
Well, the 7/7 road trip one, Sasha Christie was a part of that, wasn't she?
She was, yes. She was in one scene in Leeds because they brought. The thing about Sasha is they brought her in, I think, to try and. She actually said she knew the guys who had done it and they were good guys, etc., etc. She stood on them. She was brought onto the coast just to tell everyone that, and she didn't think they would be capable of bombing things and blowing things up. So that's actually. But in a sense, I don't know why they didn't put her on the cutting room floor for that, because she's essentially working for the other side. But they've done this several times in this series. They brought a witness on that appears to be on the side of the conspiracy theorists, just to give a false sense of perspective, to make it look like look, we are looking at both sides of the story. We're even bringing on people who don't agree with us. Look, you see. So they brought on this guy in the UFO one about animal mutilation. He was supporting the idea of animal mutilation, things like that. And they brought Sasha on when she was in Leeds in the 7/7 one. The fact of the matter is, though, Sasha was being used, I think, just as much as the other guys were.
Well, what they don't show you, Ben, is what they say to the individuals on the bus after said witnesses got off the bus. Because for all we know, they could have said, look, this is Sasha Christie. This is some of the other stuff she talks about. She's a complete Fruit Loop. If you believe what she's saying, you must be off your noddle. We've no idea what they said. I mean, it's just crazy. And I mean, I saw that Charlie Veach one. I saw the 7/7 one, and there was no mention of the BBC documentary that went out a year before the events of 7/7, which depicted almost the identical scenario, except the road vehicle was a road tanker rather than a bus. But it was 3 tube stations and a road vehicle all detonated simultaneously, wasn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And of course, there was even on the day there was the Visor consultancy group. The guy at the head of it, Peter Power, admitted that they planned drills on that day in the very, very same place. Now that was not included in the programme because the BBC said, oh, well, we wrote to Peter Power and asked him to be on the programme and he said he didn't want to be, or something like that. But I mean, I know a couple of people who are involved in that series and they all deeply regret it. And I know that what goes into this 1 hour programme is several weeks of filming. And as you said, Andy, when they were on when the cameras were off, it was different things were happening. For instance, they didn't get proper food. They were given bad food and things like that. One of the people were complaining about the food, and it's like they were deliberately trying to give them a hard time. There was this one girl. Do you remember? There's a scene where Tony Topping is arguing with this young redhead woman. Now that woman was brought on was basically phoned up the night before and said, "Look, we'll bring you on the program. Could you just learn as much as you can about this subject before you come on?" She was completely ignorant of the whole situation. Apparently, she was completely ignorant of the whole 7/7 conspiracy angle, and they just basically said, "Go online and watch a couple of things, look up on it. We'll bring you on the program tomorrow, but look up on it." This is what Frankie, either Frankie Marr or Tony Toppin revealed when I interviewed them. Frankie Marr was on the UFO one, and Tony was on the 7/7 one. I don't know which one I was going to be on. Either both of them were awful. Both of them were terrible.
Yeah, well, you also got invited to appear in that recent UFO documentary, didn't you? That Miles and Matthew Williams and Timothy Good and Tony were in. Yeah. I mean, did you not get on there because you didn't have a silly enough hat?
Well, I actually told them, because they're doing a live show. It was called, the title of the program was The Great UFO Conspiracy. Yeah. And they turned up at one of the bases events, the bases we had at the Barge Inn in Wiltshire, and they were basically asking us if we minded being in the program. I mean, I don't think they didn't want to interview me or anything. They just wondered if I mind being a cameo, just because they were going around the cameras. And I said, no thanks. No, thank you. So I went up there and I signed a little form saying I do not want my voice or image used in this program in any way. They took a photograph of me, and I thought, well, that's it. Thank goodness for that. I'm out of it. When the program broadcast, there was a shot of me in it, just 8 seconds long, but I was there, and so I phoned them up and said, and basically got a bit angry with them. I phoned Ofcom as well, and someone from Plum Pictures did call back, and they said, "We're very sorry, Mr. Emlyn-Jones. We'll take it down off on demand, and we will blur your face out we'll pixelate your face, reduce the resolution." And they did, but again, it was a really, really terrible program. This is the thing about it. The actual coverage on mainstream TV of the kind of subject we talk about on radio shows like this has plummeted. Yeah. Even if you go back to the 1990s, there were a couple of good shows on the paranormal, UFOs, things like that. Even on mainstream, they did cover it honestly in some cases. Now,
even Henry Winkler.
Henry, what?
The farmer.
Henry Winkler used to do a show, didn't he? Remember?
Happy Days.
No. He used to do what were it called? It were a paranormal thing that used to go out late at night. It used to be on like in 90s, I think it were, and it'd be on really, really late at night, and it were produced by Henry Winkler.
Oh, there's an interesting point being brought up by Jeff in the chat room, and he's saying about Peter Power and the infamous Jag in the station car park. He said a Jag can also be seen on the zebra crossing just behind the bus. Just saying.
Is that so? Oh, thanks for that information. I didn't know that. Maybe our attention was focused on the bus, so we didn't know we didn't notice the other vehicles around there.
Well, they're very good at the misdirection, aren't they, Ben?
Yeah, that's right. At the same time, I think they're toying with us. It's like that outright terror, bold and brilliant poster on the side of the bus, an advertisement for the film The Descent, which is a sort of horror movie about setting people exploring caves and coming across monsters, but they do toy with us. I think there's some kind of maybe it's to do with their belief system, the Illuminati, their satanic belief system, their idea that it becomes our fault basically if we're too easy to manipulate. We become accountable for their actions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which that means they have no bad karma from it or something like that. But it's quite frightening when you first come across this sort of information. It really is. So Richard's been on Sky. He's Richard D. Hall. He's been doing his show on Sky, and of course Sky will censor most of it. They don't let him put any of his good stuff on there.
No.
He showed some of the email exchanges when he was on stage on Sunday. He showed some of the email exchanges he's had with the Sky producers, and they're basically saying, "Mr. Hall, you can't keep sending us this material. I suggest you're going to have to negotiate your own license, your own independent license, so we can put a disclaimer up saying it's not our fault."
It's the Captain O'Morder has put into the chat room Sightings. That's the show. That's the Henry Winkler show. It was called Sightings. It was on really late at night, and it was It was sort of in 90s, I think 80s and 90s, but it was really good paranormal stuff.
All right.
Oh, thanks for that, Captain. Well, I'll tell you what, Ben, I've just noticed the first hour has really whizzed past quite quickly. So it's normally at this point in time we play a couple of tunes so we can all have a wee break or get ourselves a drink, whatever we need. So I've got a couple of KLF tunes lined up for you.
Hey, my favourites.
What do you fancy, Ben? We've got 3 a.m. Eternal, Tammy Whitenet, Justified and Ancient, What Time Is Love, Last Train to Trans Central, and Justified and Ancient, the other version.
Oh, right. Oh, boy, what a choice.
Yeah.
I'll put the one with Tammy Wynette on. I mean, they're all great. I mean, that'll do. Thanks very much for selecting those.
All right, mate. We'll put...
Was that because you knew I was on?
It was because I knew you were on, and I'd got those tracks in my library from when Alison interviewed you, because I hosted that, didn't I?
That's right, because Alison did put that on. Oh, she did. She got those in specially for me.
Okay, mate. Well, we'll play 2 or 3 tracks, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes, folks. Thanks, Ben.
Right.
And welcome back to People's Internet Radio. We are the Raconteurs. This is Raconteurs News. It's myself, Andy Young, Jason Holmes, and tonight we're joined by filmmaker, blogger, former hospital porter, novelist. What else have I missed, Ben?
Oh, well, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none, but yeah, that's pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, so we're just talking while the songs are on there, while we're having a little break, and your major subject area is ufology, so can you bring us up to speed with what's been going on in the world of ufology lately?
Well, this is an exciting year for ufology because there are several major anniversaries of various events this year. One of them is the Virginia incident of 1996. This was last month. This was a really remarkable event that took place in Brazil. Some kind of object came down to the Earth's surface, as in the Roswell incident of 1947. And we don't know exactly what happened to that object, but we do know that strange creatures were seen wandering the local area of the town of Virginia, which is in southern Brazil. And it was seen by several people. There was the authorities reacted and sent the emergency services and police and other forces out to retrieve these creatures, and they were retrieved. We don't know exactly what happened to them, but we think the Americans got involved. It appears there's some kind of global policy in place when this sort of thing happens.
Yeah.
The many witnesses saw these creatures, very, very frightening beings they were too. And there was at least 2 mysterious deaths as a result of this incident. One in particular I think is very suspicious and indicates that this was a policeman actually who was killed. A 23-year-old policeman was sadly killed. He came down with some kind of illness, which means he ended up in hospital, although he was kept on an isolation ward and he wasn't allowed visitors, and he eventually died, and a full post-mortem was never done on his body. But it appears he caught some kind of contagion from this creature as he was handling it. And to this day, his family want answers. They want to know what happened.
That's
because they know he handled the creature.
That's the guy who was off work and was called in on his leave days, wasn't it?
Elie Marco Shirazi, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to hear AJ Javard on stage at Homeforth telling the story of that was just absolutely amazing. I'd seen a couple of little things about it online, but when AJ put out the full story there, it was truly remarkable. I just so wish he could have understood my quirky accent, so we could have done an interview with him as well.
Oh, it'd be nice. Yeah, he's really done a hell of a lot of work on this. There were a very, very large number of witnesses came forward, especially from Brazilian Aerospace Command, where they said that they saw, they detected this object heading towards Brazil. It was picked up by NORAD in North America and headed south for Brazil. There were some members of the emergency services, the military and police came forward and spoke out. The members of the fire brigade who were involved in capturing the creature, they spoke out now. They contacted the ufologists in Brazil. And there's a vast number of witness testimony. And they all describe creatures that sound very, very similar. There was more than one creature. There was at least 3 of these creatures. And they appear to be the same species. Three teenage girls also saw the creature walking through town. They were just walking through the town. They just saw it sitting by a wall. And again, the descriptions are identical.
Yeah, they were brown humanoid creatures with 3 bony ridges down their head, and all have got red eyes, weren't they?
Yeah, that's right. Again, this kind of witness testimony converges to the point where it's likely they're discussing the same event or encounters with similar creatures. So that remains unsolved, unfortunately, after 20 years. But maybe with the 20th anniversary gone now, more and more people will come forward. Maybe it'll be a chance to reignite interest in the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, the big one for us over in this country, in the UK, was Rendlesham, which we had the 35th anniversary over Christmas and New Year, didn't we?
That's right, yeah. There's been annual conferences in the area now, every year. I went along to the 30th in 2010. This still remains, I think, vitally important. I mean, the amount of evidence is massive, it's huge.
Yeah.
The expert eyewitness testimony from trained observers from the US Air Force Security Police, lots of other witnesses in the area. Investigations still going on today. People like Derek Savory and Brenda Butler are still working on it. Mm-hmm. People like Gary Hazeltine, they're still witnessing. We're still hearing from witnesses like Larry Warren, who are speaking out on stage. So this is another case which, again, the government, they issued a report on it in 1983. There's been not much since. There's several other incidents have come forward, but several other statements have been made. Nick Pope has commented on it, of course, bless him. He has to say something, doesn't he? We're still wondering exactly how much of this information is still being hidden. Based on what we know from people like Larry Warren and Colonel Charles Holt and many others, there's still a lot of our questions that need to be answered. There's still a lot the government are not telling us.
Well, for me, a big development in that was last year when Adrian Bustinza went on the radio for the first time in nearly 35 years and spoke to John Burroughs and Linda Moulton Howe, and he pretty much confirmed everything Larry had said, and Larry actually joined in the show, didn't he?
Yeah.
But then he went on to say that the creatures that Larry saw leaving the craft, he saw one of them right next to Larry, didn't he?
Yeah.
Which freaked Larry out.
Well, yeah, I mean, Larry was freaked. And this is really great of Adrian Bustinza to do this. I mean, he's made several comments on Facebook over the years, basically saying, Larry's right. Because Larry had a lot of stick from people, especially the aforementioned Colonel Holt, who has treated Larry very badly, I have to say. But Adrian Bustinza is now supporting Larry. He's broken his silence. Larry himself has suffered health problems as a result of his encounter. Mm-hmm. Now, John Burroughs has actually recently had his case heard, and he's been awarded compensation and an official record on his military record that states that he was injured in the line of duty, effectively, by this extraterrestrial encounter. This is something they've never done before. He's had to fight for this. John Burroughs almost died a couple of years ago because he went into hospital with a heart problem. He had a major heart condition, and which was potentially life-threatening, and the doctors couldn't find his medical records because they were classified.
Yeah, they were all at Fort Meade, Maryland, weren't they?
Yeah, that could have killed him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and John is now officially a UFO casualty. He's the first. Well, I don't know if he's the first official UFO casualty, but he has had to fight for this, and he's got it. And I'm really, really pleased for him. And I'm hoping this will be a test case for others. Mm-hmm. So this may be a floodgates case, and this may trigger off several other lawsuits where other people who've had encounters with these objects, like Larry and many others, may have an opportunity now to actually be recognised for what happened to them and have their health problems addressed. Because Larry and John both have major health problems as a result since they had their encounter. Mm-hmm. And they've suffered psychologically and physically as a result of this experience. From day one after Larry had this encounter, he was coming down with all kinds of strange conditions. So not unlike the guy in Brazil we talked about who sadly died. Larry survived, but he's still been very ill. Yeah,
he was bleeding through his skin at one stage.
Yeah.
And the doctor said to him, "Have you been exposed to any nuclear devices?" And but that kind of links into another major part of that story, because some people say, well, I don't give a damn, not interested in UFOs. But the other major part of that story, and I think why Larry has been so vilified from so many directions, is because Larry spoke out and said, well, the nukes that were supposed to be at Greenham Common weren't there at all. They were all at Bentwaters. And I think that's why he's getting so much flack, don't you?
It could well be. I mean, there was a major diplomatic incident triggered by this event, which, again, you've got to ask the skeptics, why would anyone lie about this? Why would official sources lie about this if it meant that they were going to have to admit that they basically had a weapons cache there, which they shouldn't have had? Because if you remember, the Greenham Common base in Berkshire was the focus of enormous amount of attention. There was a peace camp there. People used to link arms around our entire base. I remember there were so many people they could surround the entire base. But the people at Woodbridge and Bentwaters used to laugh at them because they're in the wrong place. Yeah. There's maybe a dozen warheads, which we probably weren't even there, which were going to be put on cruise missiles, when there were many, many more, many times as many in the weapons storage area of those bases. And, of course, this was never admitted. The government never admitted it was there. These weapons were not licensed. They were not legitimate. And so the government decided to just put them there anyway and not tell anyone and hope that nobody noticed. So the presence of this UFO triggered off this particular incident, which, again, the government have no incentive for lying, for stirring this up themselves. I've heard it said that the government basically made this up. There all kinds of stories have come forward. It was some kind of test, some kind of time and motion study that they concocted. But again, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, when I was at the hospital, we did these various drills and things like that. But you'd never combine it. You'd never combine these kinds of tests together with the real live action. It's just not safe. Well, I mean, these guys had weapons which were armed, which were loaded. Mm-hmm. If anything went wrong, someone could get shot.
Yeah. I mean, Larry says, I'm depicted as this young green kid, but he said in reality we were all trained killers. We knew what we had to do. Yeah.
I mean, he didn't have a lot of experience. He was quite new. I mean, it was just in his first week this happened when he was there. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, he was highly trained, yeah. I mean, he went through, he talks in his book about the training he went through. I mean, he got his PHP, which was basically his qualification for working alongside the nuclear ordnance, mm-hmm. They don't give that to anyone. The government are not obliged to let you work with nuclear weapons. If you're considered unsound of mind, if you develop any mental problems, you are immediately removed from your responsibility for those weapons.
Yeah.
And so the idea that Larry was crazy in any way, is crazy. These are the people who are, by their very nature, have their mental health very, very carefully monitored. That's like Captain Robert Salas, who's also in the US Air Force. He was the guy who was in the launch facility for intercontinental missiles.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, the idea that he lost his mind and started... that guy was monitored 24/7, because if he made a mistake, it would be the end of the world.
Absolutely. I mean...
You'd be like Dr. Strangelove, they'd be shooting weapons and the Russians would be shooting back, and that's it, we're all dead.
Yeah, it was our first conference when Bob Salas was at Homeforth in 2014. And... my other half was a little bit sceptical, and when Gary asked who in the audience believes that some UFOs are visitors from other places, she didn't put her hand up, but when he said who doesn't believe, she didn't put her hand up either, because she said her hand wouldn't go up. She was just so worried about being ridiculed, like I get ridiculed in the local town because people think I'm the local nutter. She thought she'd get all of that in there. But then she sat and listened to people like Bob Salas. And, Robert, he was so meticulous in the information he gave. I knew a bit about the Malmstrom incident before then, but I knew a hell of a lot more once he'd finished talking. And he's so calm and matter-of-fact in what he says, and all the witnesses that he brings to the situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's no doubt something real happened there. I mean, and... This is the thing. Gary Heseltine makes this point as well. If the skeptics were right and this was all delusion, and this was all coaxing or fraud, we'd see a completely different evidential picture.
Yeah, why has nobody reported seeing Father Christmas?
That's a good point, isn't it? Yeah, because you'd think that you get at least one, but no adult witness has ever reported seeing Santa Claus. It's
One or
crazy.
two have, but they've usually been then, gone back into the cells.
Exactly. Well, why don't we see him all the time? This is the thing. The skeptics, well, people like Dr. What's his name? Mark. Andy Roberts Andy Roberts' friend, whose name escapes me now. I was thinking Mark Pilkington, but it's not. But he says that basically UFOs are a form of folklore. Basically, they are something that we create essentially with our imaginations, with our collective imaginations, and so. For instance, if there was a story in World War I about the Angel of Mons, about angels and things like that, and so before you knew it, people started seeing real angels on battlefields and things like that. Mm-hmm. And he says UFOs are a type of this, a bit like Robin Hood, not quite fake, but not quite real. Dr. David Clarke, how can I forget that name?
That's the name, yeah. I mean, yeah, you say collective creation. You and I were both stood outside of Probe October 2014 with about 100 other people who were stood watching this thing in the sky, and if it was fake, it managed to appear on the photographs quite well.
Yeah, it was very, very clearly visible to everyone. It was some kind of silver metallic object.
Yeah.
It was, unfortunately, it was very distant and not very visible, but people had telephoto lenses on their cameras. They did manage to get quite good photos of it. Unfortunately, it remains a mystery to this day. We don't know what it was, but...
No, I got some quite clear, well, not clear shots, but there was a clear outline, and what appeared on my photographs was basically a sphere with what looked like a lampshade on top of it, but slightly tilted.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of other people who got similar shots, but somebody got some footage of it, and it looked like it was actually changing shape as they were filming it.
Yeah, it's a very, very odd thing. Unfortunately, it's just a shame it didn't come any closer, whatever it was. It didn't come any closer. But this is an example of what we're talking about. According to Dr. David Clarke, we only see these things because they're already existing in our imaginations. For instance, one thing Clarke says is he says that the sightings of grey aliens suddenly appeared in 1977. And before that, they were almost unknown, and suddenly these grey aliens, these grey creatures with little black eyes, classic alien, that appears in 1977. The reason it appears in 1977 is because that was when the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind was released, which featured those aliens for the first time, he claims, in popular culture. However, Robbie Graham, who's just written a book on UFOs in the media, he managed to get hold of the production designer for that film and asked him, where did you get the ideas for these little grey aliens? Did you make them up? Where did you get them from? And he said, oh no, I just called up a couple of people who'd seen them. I phoned them up. Some of these contactees, I phoned them up and I said, what are these aliens? What do they look like? And they told me, and I put them in the film. So basically what David Clarke has done is he's got the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
These images exist in our media because they exist in real life, not the other way around.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've got a question that's been given to me by my friend Heath, the microwave pizza man. He's sent me a question. He says, there's an asteroid due March the 6th called 2013 TX68. NASA has a sentry table, 0 to 9 rating, 0 being no risk, 9 being concerning. It has recently changed from a level 7 to an 8. At 52 metres wide, what is the potential threat to Earth? And that, he says, is a question from Corn Beef, which is like Cockney rhyme Islam for Heath.
Oh, hi Heath. Now, I've been looking at this. I heard about this story, and there's actually no risk from this particular asteroid at present. What the scale that NASA are giving it is to do with their new planetary defense office. Sounds a very cool thing, doesn't it? But it's nothing to do with aliens. It's to do with asteroids. But what they're concerned about is that when this asteroid comes around a second time, maybe in a few years, it will be closer to the Earth than it's coming now. It is going to come very close to the Earth. It's going to become within about 11,000 miles, which sounds a long way, but in cosmic terms, that's scraping the paint off. Yeah. And it is very, very big. I mean, it is a very, very big thing. It's about, I've heard several estimates for its size. Last thing I heard was 105 feet across. Now, if this was to strike the Earth, it would cause devastation over the area where it hit. It wouldn't kill us all off or anything like that. But if it hit a city like London or something, that city would be obliterated, and most of the people in it would be killed. So yeah, it is a risk. It is a possibility that this could come. It could hit the Earth. It would explode with a force of 150 megatons, which is bigger even than a nuclear bomb. It's a huge explosion. Yeah. And so NASA are trying to find out ways of deflecting these things away so that they don't actually hit the Earth. If they are on a collision course, if there's some big thing out there with our name on it, we want to get rid of it, move it away. And you don't need to send up Bruce Willis on a space shuttle. There's lots of other much more simpler, slightly less dramatic ways of altering the course of an asteroid so that it doesn't actually strike the Earth. So don't worry, you're not going to get hit by this object this time. But NASA are going to be watching it in case it comes round again closer next time.
With 2/3 of the Earth being covered in water, do you think that if it hit water, which it most likely would do, that would probably cause more damage than if it was to hit land?
Well, it could cause a tsunami. Yeah, I mean, it depends how close it is to land. If it's not too far away, it might cause like a tsunami type event, which could devastate the coastline of nearby land. Yes.
Oh, we're having a bit of a space weather moment here, Ben.
Space weather.
Yeah. Uniquely points out that two are due on March the 2nd and 3rd, called Apollo. Really? No risk from those either. 0.6 AU away. Is that astronomical units?
It is. That's a long, long way. 0.6 AU is the equivalent of 0.6% of the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So it's about 50 million miles. That's a very, very long way indeed. I mean, the reason I know so much about this is because Andy knows, if you listen to my show, I do a weekly space weather report on my radio show. And I keep an eye on things like this. So yeah, I mean, there are big things out there. There's comets, I think, probably pose more of a risk because they're bigger and they're harder to. They don't follow a regular pattern like asteroids. They're not in orbit around the. They don't have a neat orbit around the sun. They sort of fall in from interstellar space and they come through randomly and very, very haphazardly. And so comets, I think, pose more of a threat. However, there are ways and means, even if you don't take into account secret technology such as anti-gravity and things like that, which thereby hangs a tail. So even if you take into account publicly available technology, the space agencies are working on ways to keep these things away from the Earth.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've done one service tonight, Ben, and that is that my friend Heath is going to sleep a whole lot better.
Oh, good. Well, I hope you do, Keith.
Excellent. Well, Ben, we did cover some of the important anniversaries that are coming up in 2016. But I was thinking more along the lines of what's actually been happening lately, because busy as I've been, I haven't really been keeping up myself. So, anything particularly exciting happened recently?
Well, that's always a few things. We're going into a situation where we're having various elections. There's the EU referendum coming up, apparently, and of course the Americans there's the American presidential election, and it's very interesting to watch these processes because I get the feeling that Hillary Clinton is going to be the next president, and it's all being rigged and manipulated to make sure that she gets there. It's just, you see this very often with elections, especially in America, where there's quite a complicated process when it comes to selecting their leader, the head of government, the head of state, the president. They have primaries and caucuses before they go on to the main election, so the different candidates have to be selected. Eventually there's like 2 or 3 candidates, usually 2 candidates, one from the 2 main parties. At the moment, most American voters seem to like there's several candidates they're particularly fond of is Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. These two guys are very, very popular. Everyone seems to like them. They seem to be people who are honest and sincere in what they're doing. They're in politics for ideological reasons, whether you agree with them or not. They appear to be people who are in it for a matter of principle. And I think voters warm to that. And you think to yourself, well, obviously these guys are the guys who are going to have to battle out to be president. But something strange is happening. We have a situation where Donald Trump was at the Iowa caucus, which apparently is very important for the Republican Party. And because he's the most popular, everyone think, well, obviously he's going to win that. But he lost. He lost to Ted Cruz, who's some non-entity that no one really likes and no one really thinks much of and hasn't a chance of winning anyway. Bernie Sanders, again, he went up against Hillary Clinton in a primary in New Hampshire. He won it's a complicated system because they have this college of electors. It's really, really weird that Bernie Sanders received about 3/4 of the vote, but he got less electors. And it seems they're using the complexities of the system to manipulate their character into power. Now, Hillary Clinton is totally different. She's well connected. She has her campaign is funded to the realm of dozens of times more than the others. She's of course the wife of Bill Clinton, who was president all through the 90s in the United States, and she was probably controlling him as well because he looks like he's mind controlled, and she was probably his handler. Mm-hmm. And it looks like she's going to be president herself, and it looks like she is the chosen one. And we're going to see the other candidates sort of fall away. Even though they're more popular, even though they're much more likeable and people prefer them, we're still going to end up with Hillary Clinton going up against some non-entity from the Republicans, who she's going to walk all over and become president. So, I mean, we'll have to see what happens. I might be wrong, but the signs are so far, it looks like that's the way it's going.
Well, I've just thought I'm really looking forward to seeing your disclosure speech from Hillary Clinton, Ben, because you did one when Obama got in, didn't you?
Yeah, I have promised I would do it.
Yeah.
I pretended to be Obama. It was very controversial because I put on the blackface makeup and everything. I pretended to be Obama and I pretended to be doing the disclosure speech and realising, oh my God, you can't do that. Oh my, no, we can't do disclosure. I promised I will dress up in drag, I'll pretend to be Hillary Clinton, and I will remake that video. And I can't back out of it now.
No, that's it. We're not going to let you forget that one, Ben.
I will do it.
Who's going to dress up as Bill, though?
I don't know. Maybe my girlfriend will do it. I don't know.
We could advertise it, couldn't we? We need a bill for Ben.
I can't imagine. I'm going to have to be like. Yeah, but it's basically the idea is that the presidents they're making this just UFO disclosure speech, and they keep getting phone calls from people saying, "Don't do it. You can't do the disclosure speech because you can't release this secret. This secret is too big to be released." Mm-hmm. I mean, look at the media. The media goes into apoplexy when some MP buys a duck bond with expenses. How are they going to cope with the fact that, hey, by the way, just so you know, there are aliens out there. We've known about it for a long time. We've even got their power plants and we back-engineered their technology, but we kept it from you for your own good. Well, it wasn't for your own good, actually. It was for our own good and for your great detriment. You've suffered enormously for the last century because we've kept this secret, but we're so sorry. We'll make it up to you. We'll bring back school milk. It's impossible. It's a political impossibility.
I wanted to go back to something that when you were talking about an incident in Brazil earlier on. I wanted to pick up on something that you said. You said that there was some sort of international agreement. Now, what did you mean by that? Do you think that there's an international agreement by all governments for non-disclosure, or do you think there's an international agreement by all the governments for an etiquette on how to deal with these situations when they arise?
I think the latter. The etiquette is how to deal with crash retrievals. Now, the only evidence I have for this, obviously, is the fact that wherever these events happen in the world, very, very similar things take place. And it very often involves the Americans getting involved. Timothy Good mentioned this. He's actually interviewed a couple of people involved who were relating to this, and apparently the Brazilian authorities were very upset when the Americans got came along because the Americans were pushing the local authorities out the way. And it looks like the retrieval by the local authorities was quite amateurish compared to many others. It's so it looks like there is some kind of global policy in place if the same thing happens whenever these events occur, which it appears all the countries where these events have occurred have signed up to. Because in 1989 there was an event in South Africa in which a craft came down, complete with aliens, and again the Americans were called in to deal with it. So, well, I can't confirm this, but it does look like that.
So, sort of an agreement between all nations for the etiquette for what happens when something crashes.
Yeah.
So a retrieval system.
That's right. Well, whenever these craft come down, they do sometimes come down. The wreckage is secretly salvaged by the government. Basically, the government seal off the area. They then secretly salvage the wreckage and whatever's inside it, and they don't tell the people. They put out some fake story about weather balloons, and then that's it. And it's buried. The Roswell incident of 1947 is the most famous of these, but it's by far not the only one. In fact, it's not even the first. There are a couple of events even before 1947 that appear to be similar in nature to Roswell. So, yeah, this is a worldwide, long-term situation we're in with our relationships with extraterrestrials.
So do you believe this etiquette has been put in place due to an agreement between governments, a secret agreement between governments and the extraterrestrials themselves? Perhaps there's some sort of agreement between the two entities, and so that they agree that this is the way that things are to be retrieved.
As far as the extraterrestrials themselves go, I don't know whether it's something that they've worked out with the ETs. All we know is it seems to be something certainly within the human world that has been agreed. Now, when it comes to deals with the ETs, there are reports that there has been some kind of summit and some kind of policy worked out between humans on the secret governmental level and extraterrestrials. I've heard a little bit about that. Several people have talked about this. Timothy Good has mentioned this, Linda Moulton Howe. Several other people in ufology have talked about this, and they've talked to people who report things such as landings of a type seen in the film Close Encounters, which is, of course, all about this. The film Close Encounters is about a secret meeting between government officials and extraterrestrial beings. And some people have come forward and said this is based on reality, this is based on true stories. And there's several witnesses have said, oh, I saw something very similar to this at Edwards Air Force Base in 1954. President Eisenhower went missing for a day, and this is where he was, meeting the ETs, things like that. I don't know, though. I mean, I can't tell. It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't know.
I found it was quite interesting and something we don't hear much about in this country. What Roberto Panotti spoke about at Homeforth the other year. He was talking about a group of people in Italy who'd had regular contact with the ETs over a many-year period.
Yeah. That was interesting. That was, I think, the Amicizia event.
That's it. I couldn't think of the name. Yeah.
Timothy Good has written about this in his latest book, actually, and he's written about it in detail. He knows Roberto Panotti. But there apparently was some kind of ET presence in Italy starting sometime in the 1950s, and it went on for a long time. These were people who were very tall. I mean, there's a photograph of one of these guys, and he's enormous. He's, I think, 8 feet tall. Mr. Kenio, his name is. But they had all kinds of abilities, like they had the ability to remain invisible so that people wouldn't see them. I mean, they could walk down the street and they wouldn't be literally invisible, but they could manipulate people's minds through telepathy to prevent them from registering their occurrence, their appearance, things like that.
Oh wow!
So this is an example of. But these were creatures very human-looking creatures who came to Earth and did try to make some kind of friendly contact with the people of Earth.
Ah, yeah. We've got an interesting question from Earth is Flat in the chat room. Thank you, Sol. And he says, question, do you think it's possible that these ETs come from lands deep within Antarctica rather than from outer space? What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, this is an important question because we often use the word ETs, aliens, and there's this almost tacit assumption that we're talking about creatures that come from other planets and fly down here in their flying saucers, as we would when we fly in our rockets up into space, but theirs are much more complicated. And if we had a good enough telescope, we could see their planet and things like this. We don't actually know that for a fact. We know, I mean, in the book AD After Disclosure by Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel, they write a list, the authors write a list of what they think these creatures might be. And the list is extraterrestrials is just one of about a dozen different possibilities. Others include interdimensional creatures, time travelers, angels and demons, creatures that live on this earth, but we just don't know about it yet. And it's possible it's possible they come from under the sea or under the ice caps of Antarctica or somewhere like that we haven't explored properly. And that's their location. It's speculation to say that, but then it's speculation in many cases to say that they definitely fly down here from other planets. We don't know that for certain. It's possible they're all of the above or none of the above. Do you know what I mean? They could be something we haven't even thought of yet.
An interesting thing somebody put to me a while back, Ben, is that if you were to be walking through, say for argument's sake, Benidorm, and you saw someone from your hometown in a taxi in Benidorm, you wouldn't automatically assume that they'd come all the way from their hometown in that taxi, would you?
Yeah, that's right.
So therefore, if you see one of these craft flying about in our atmosphere, why should you automatically assume that if something's come from a far different galaxy, solar system, whatever you want to think of it as, why should you automatically assume that that craft that they're in now should be the means by which they got here?
Well, quite so. It could be that they, wherever they travel from, wherever they come from, they have like a big mothership, and the small craft come out of the mothership. Mm-hmm. We've seen this on several sci-fi series, and indeed George Adamski, the famous contactee from the 1950s in America, actually said that this was the case. He was actually shown. He claims to have been shown a mothership. Mm-hmm. He was taken up in a saucer-shaped craft to a mothership. Now, I mean, people say, well, maybe he wasn't very credible, and well, there are problems with some of the things he said, but he's one of many.
Yeah. So, well, I was thinking more along the lines of we hear about portals all the time, and these portals opening and closing. I was thinking, could the visitors perhaps come through a portal and have something already here waiting for them, like a taxi? The portal being the aircraft that flies them over here, and then they pick up their taxi when they get here.
Absolutely. I mean, this, again, is a distinct possibility. We're dealing with things that travel not through space in the normal sense, but through wormholes. They have some kind of matter transportation system. And we see this in the film They Live, which is about an alien presence on Earth. It's a brilliant film. The aliens come from various distant places and other dimensions, even other universes, through a system of interdimensional transports. And when they get here, of course, they just move around normally. It could be that the extraterrestrials come through these portals from other dimensions, and then they use flying saucers as their various kinds of their means of transportation. Maybe they have bases and terminals, to use the airport analogy again, on this planet.
Mm. So,
well, I mean, the phenomenon's been around for such a long time. I would suggest that they would, if there are people from, if there are beings from other planets, that they would have a base on here. I mean, really wouldn't make sense to be floating, just have a mothership that you could spot with a telescope these days.
Yeah. There's several places that they could hide it. I mean, they could hide it on the dark side of the moon. They could hide it underneath the sea or in a remote part of the world, underground somewhere. But yeah, there's all kinds of places they could hide their terminal, and we would never see it. Mm. Especially if the government are collaborating and the government are deliberately keeping us away from these areas.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben.
I mean, the Antarctic in particular is a place where there's a lot of secrets. Movement in the Antarctic is very difficult. Of course, the climate makes it extremely hard because it's bitterly cold there. And also, there's a military presence there. Everything's controlled strictly by the military.
Hmm. Well,
it makes you wonder that, doesn't it?
Admiral Byrd certainly had quite a bit to say about Antarctica, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, and there's several different reports that he gave out. Some of them may be original, some of them not. But the fact of the matter is that Admiral Byrd was hospitalised when he got back. He was apparently suffering from a breakdown. He had a nervous breakdown. Although maybe it was the questions they wanted him to be quite silent. What better way to silence him than to lock him up as a psychiatric patient? The same was said, because one of the men who went to Antarctica in Operation High Jump in 1946 with Admiral Byrd was a guy called Admiral James Forrestal. He also was committed as a psychiatric patient, and in 1949 he died. He apparently committed suicide by throwing himself out of a hospital window at a high level. Thing is, anyone who knows anything about hospitals would know that if you're going to put a psychiatric ward high up in the hospital, you make sure the windows don't open. Yep. Otherwise, it'll be basically raining patients.
Of course it would, yeah.
So I don't believe Forrestal committed suicide. I think he was silenced in some way.
Oh, we've got a good question here in the chat room for us, and we've only got a quarter of an hour left, so... what does Ben think of CERN?
Now, CERN, oh God, CERN is ostensibly a very, very large instrument. It's the biggest scientific instrument ever discovered. It's, I think, 16 miles across, something like that. And it's supposedly used to investigate the smallest particles of matter by smashing together tiny hadrons, tiny nuclear particles from atoms. However, there's been some questions raised over its true purpose, and safety concerns by people like Walter Wagner and people like that have come forward and said that perhaps it shouldn't be used because it has a potential danger. One of these is it could possibly create mini black holes and strangelets and several other nasty things like that, which could potentially trigger a chain reaction, which would lead to a destruction of the Earth or the universe even. What's interesting about CERN is I don't want to give you nightmares, guys, all right? But this is there. This is there, and it is a worry. CERN is a scientific institution, but the Nuclear Power Company of India donated a statue to CERN, and it was a statue of the god Shiva, and it stands outside CERN. They didn't just put it in some museum; they put it in the courtyard of CERN. The statue of this ancient god from India, one of the most powerful gods in the Hindu pantheon. Shiva is the creator-destroyer. It's the god of revolution, the god in which basically destroys everything and builds it up again. And there's also a 666, number 666 in the logo of CERN. So it does make me wonder if this instrument does have some kind of nefarious purpose. If it does, then I don't want you to despair, okay, because there's ways and means, there's all kinds of ways and means that somebody might help us out to deal with it. I don't know. But there's been some mysterious breakdowns at CERN. So perhaps somebody out there is wading in to lend us a hand. I don't know. I hope so. But there's people like Brian Cox. Oh, Professor Brian Cox is just such a loathsome little individual who's always on TV or on the radio. talking in his weedy little voice about all these things with such authority, and it's always perfectly safe and stuff like that. And it's just, I just don't.
He's actually got a double-barreled name. It's the other part of his surname is Ucker.
He is indeed. That suits him perfectly. But yeah, I think he's been made a star. He's very famous, and of course he'll say whatever he needs to say to keep his position in the media and stay famous. But Cox is really just, and people like him. I mean, it could be that these scientists are dealing with forces they don't understand. Now, it's easy for me to say that as a hospital porter with no knowledge on this subject, but it's not just. It's people like with the same qualifications and same abilities of Cox are some of these people who've spoken out. There's this guy whose name I can't remember, who said some very, very interesting things about CERN lately, and he's a physicist. He is a nuclear physicist, like Professor Brian Cox. Yet he disagrees with him. So I am very, very concerned about that. And the problem with CERN is, well, it's difficult to know what to do about it. I mean, what can you do? I mean, it seems you can go and protest outside the gates and things like that. But I feel confident. I mean, I do. I'm not a believer in messiahs and divine judgment and things like that. But I do feel that if we really were up against it, there's nothing we could do. Somebody would lend us a hand. Somebody with the ability to intervene would intervene.
Yeah, and it's probably happened 1,000 times in the past, but because the thing didn't materialise and happen, we don't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about CERN has suffered some mysterious breakdowns. No one knows why, but it's like something just happened. It was working fine, and oh my goodness, something's happened. It's not working anymore. Like someone's just thrown a spanner in the works. So I try to remain hopeful. I think if you can't do anything about it, and you just that's what you got to do. Just try not to let it despair you, not to let it get you down to the point where you think you become despondent and you just feel there's no hope left. Because there's always hope.
Of course there is.
There's always hope.
I've got another question just come through from Heath. He says, does Ben have any opinions on what a recent article called Planet 9, or what Zachariah Sitchin called Nibiru?
Right, yeah, well, hi Tina, hi. So I just saw Tina, hi. Nibiru is interesting. Nibiru is supposedly a planet which orbits the sun at a very, goes a long way out, then comes back in again, close to the sun. There's a lot of talk about it coming back in 2012. The thing about Nibiru is it's obviously a planet of some considerable size, which means that if it was out there and it was going to approach the inner solar system any time within the next few millennia, we would see it. You can't have cover-ups in space. Astronomy is the only truly democratic science because all the data is above our heads. Lots and lots of people have telescopes. There's loads of observatories, lots of amateur astronomers out there. And so I don't believe there's an object that's about to come close to the centre of the Earth's solar system. What there is the astronomers have recently discovered that they think there is another planet out there. It's orbiting a long way off. It's not going to hurt the Earth. It's millions and millions of miles away. It's somewhere up there in the outer solar system, and they're trying to hunt it down at the moment. They know it's there because it's altering its gravitational field is altering the orbits of other planets. So that's how they can track it down. But it's obviously it's a big universe out there and it's a long way off, so I don't know if they're going to find it. Now, there's some people who say that there was another planet in the inner solar system, which Sitchin talks about, and that it was destroyed. And maybe people say, well, the asteroid belt was a part of this destruction, used to be a planet and it blew up. Excuse me, I'm getting a bit hoarse. So I don't believe Nibiru exists. If it exists, it's a long, long way away. It's not going to come back for a very long time. And again, it's nothing to worry about. But it could be that it's out there somewhere, a long, long way off.
You're on mute, Andy.
Oh, that's very good of you to point that out. Cheers, Jason. I'd just like to give a quick shout out for anyone who hasn't found out yet. We've got something rather exciting happening after our show. And Danielle Williamson is coming back on air. She's been away for a while. She's had a few things she needs to sort out. and she's coming back on tonight. She's talking about homelessness, and she's got some interesting guests lined up. Now, I'm not quite sure if she's going to be ready to go bang on 9 o'clock, so we might have to run a few minutes further, but that's no problem. We'll sort that out between us. So, Ben, we've got a few more questions. We've got another one from Earth is Flat. He's saying, does the guest agree rockets need an atmosphere to thrust against?
No, I don't, because rockets don't need an atmosphere, because they essentially operate according to Newton's third law, which means all forces are equal and opposite, which means what a rocket does, it simply squirts a fire out of its rear end, a bit like I do when I've had a curry. But well, I don't fly up into space. But it squirts this fire out, and the force of this explosion, essentially, this controlled explosion of chemical energy, pushes the rocket away from the centre of the explosion. So if you push in one direction, you always get a force in the other direction. So, for instance, if you're skating, anyone who's been skating knows this, that if you push against the side of the ice rink, you'll push yourself away. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to push it against the side, you'll always do that. If you try and get out of a boat, this is close to the sea, when you jump from the boat to the land, the boat will be pushed back out a little bit. That's Newton's third law. All forces are equal and opposite. Now, the difference is what's interesting. We were talking about UFOs. Mm-hmm. UFOs do not have a very, very different situation. Right? UFOs appear to break Newton's third law because they seem to be able to manipulate gravitational fields.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean they do break Newton's third law, but it just looks like it, because they appear to have no form of power, but yet they move. And it could be they're moving by creating artificial gravity wells into which they then are drawn into, and the force of gravity actually pushes them along. This is gravitational field, anti-gravity, gravitational manipulation, things like this. And this is maybe one of the secrets that the government are keeping from us.
Well, I think what Earth is Flat is saying is that if you've got a rocket that goes in air, it's pushing against the air, it's thrusting against the air. Now, in a vacuum, surely when the rocket thrusts and there's no resistance from the air because it's a vacuum, then surely the rocket is going to stay in the place where it is. It's not going to move at all because there's no equal and opposite. Because for a start, the two things are not equal, are they? I mean, one's a vacuum, and the other one is thrust. But it's nothing.
Yeah. The thing is, the rocket's not essentially pushing against anything. It's the explosion is pushing outwards. The explosion at the bottom of the rocket is pushing outwards. I'd say to this person, Earth is Flat, the way I can demonstrate to this to you is the next time, if you go to a skating rink near your area, there are lots of public skating rinks around nowadays. Go onto the ice, take with you a big basketball or something like that, and stand in the middle of the ice and throw the basketball away from yourself. Now, in doing that, you are actually pushing the basketball away from yourself. But what you will find is, you will find yourself sliding backwards as you were doing this. You're pushing the basketball away from yourself, you're throwing that, so you're not throwing it, it's not throwing against it, it's just throwing something away from yourself. You will move backwards slightly, because Newton's third law says that the force you use to push the basket away, like a rocket does, is pushing its own fuel away, its own exhaust away, operates in an opposite direction on you and pushes you forward. So that's how a rocket works. It can work in an atmosphere or outside an atmosphere. A jet engine, on the other hand, needs an atmosphere. The reason is because it doesn't carry its own oxygen. The fuel has to mix with the air in order to work. So a jet engine would not work in space because there's no oxygen to mix with the fuel to create the combustion, to create the thrust.
So what if it's not a jet engine? Then what is it? If a jet engine won't work in space?
No. Well, basically because a jet engine needs air from the outside. If you could get a big tank of air and attach it to a jet engine, it would work in space. It would be a rocket engine, essentially.
Well, I suppose another way to prove that, Ben, is if you were to stand on a skateboard on a very smooth surface and you've got a medicine ball and you threw that medicine ball away from you, you'd be propelled in the opposite direction, but you haven't pushed against anything solid, have you?
Exactly, Andy. Yeah, that's exactly. A skateboard is as good a way of testing this as ice skating, actually. Anything extended with wheels on, which moves easily, you wouldn't be pushing away against anything, but you would create propulsion simply from your own force of pushing something.
But there is also friction when you're talking about ice skating. When you talk about ice skating, there is a minimal amount of friction.
Yeah.
So there is a minimal amount of grip. So it can be manipulated. If you're in a vacuum, then by definition there's nothing to have an opposite reaction. You can only have an equal and opposite reaction if both sides are capable of having an equal and opposite reaction.
No, I think in this case the friction actually works in the opposite direction. The friction doesn't assist the reaction. You're right. I mean, there is a little bit of friction on ice. There's a little bit of friction on skateboards. It's only a small amount compared to, say, standing on a floor, which is why that's a good way of doing an experiment. But the amount of friction, actually, what it does is it actually dampens. It doesn't actually assist the reaction. You don't need that friction to be there for the reaction to happen. If you went up in space, I mean, if you went up in space as an astronaut and you took a big ball with you and threw it away, you would fly off. Mm-hmm. You would fly backwards. There's several actual space things that are special tools that they use in space, which are designed specifically to work on this principle. Mm-hmm. Which are not rockets, but they're like they're things with springs on, which move the astronauts around.
Yeah.
But if you create friction, then you create an energy.
Well,
so if energy is created, you can't create energy in a vacuum because there's no way. Sorry, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. That's
all right. The friction actually is created. This friction is created simply by the movement of one solid object against another. In other case, the blade of the skates or the wheels of the skateboard generate friction as they move. Now, the reason I suggested, though, I mean, you can do this with or without, with no friction, as in being on board, being in a spacesuit flying in space, or with minimal friction on an ice rink or on a skateboard. The reason I said that I chose the skateboard and ice rink is because the friction there is minimal. If you try to do that standing on, say, a concrete surface, you wouldn't notice this reaction when you're throwing the ball away from you, because the friction is actually the friction holding your feet to the ground, your weight pressing against the ground. In that case, the friction is too high, and you wouldn't move. It would be very, very hard to detect that effect.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ben, the 2 hours is absolutely flown past, mate, and thanks for joining us tonight. It's always fascinating talking to you. Could you please give out the links to where people can find your work online for anyone who wants to find out more?
It's HPANWO, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. That's the main website. It's also a portal to all my other sites, the radio show, the fiction blog, forum, radio, all the other things I do, which is quite a wide array.
Mm-hmm. I did post a link to your YouTube channel in the chat room earlier on. There's some
thank you.
Fantastic videos on there. I've spent hours and hours and hours watching your videos, Ben. And thank you, because without you, I probably wouldn't be here doing this.
Oh, I'm glad I've inspired you.
Anyway,
yeah,
folks.
Thank you, buddy. It's been fantastic. Really has been great. It's the first time speaking to you, but it's been fantastic.
You too, Jason. I've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Jason, and thanks, Ben. And what we'll do now, we'll play out with a bit of KLF, especially for Ben.
Oh, thank you.
And Danielle will be along as soon as she's ready. Thanks, everyone. Good evening, and we'll be back on Friday with Paul, our high-level financial insider, with his latest updates. Good night, everyone.